Have you ever felt like life passed you by while you were waiting for someone else to love you, right? At 53, Miriam Holt stands with her wedding dowry in hand and nowhere to spend it after being left at the altar. She rides into Dust Bottle Crossing looking for a milk cow and finds herself at a livestock auction where a man in chains stands with quiet dignity. His name is Virgil Stokes. He's 56, and when the crowd jeers at him, something in Miriam's heart breaks wide open. She raises her bid, wins his freedom for $10 silver, then does something that shocks everyone she hands him, his papers, and offers him a partnership to rebuild her family's old stage stop. What happens when two broken hearts discover they might be exactly what each other needs? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning sun cast long shadows across the dusty main street of Dust Bottle Crossing as Miriam Holt guided her mare toward the livestock pens behind Murphy's General Store. The leather reticule bouncing against her hip contained $47 silver money that should have been spent on wedding cake and celebratory whiskey, not whatever practical necessities might keep a woman alone from starving through the winter. 3 days ago, she'd stood in her best blue dress in the parlor of her boarding house room, watching the clock tick past the hour when Harold Brennan was supposed to arrive with the preacher. The other boarders had gathered in the hallway, whispering behind their hands as the minutes stretched into an hour, then two. Mrs. Patterson had finally knocked and entered with a folded note that smelled of Harold's Bay rum cologne and cowardice. "Cannot go through with it." The note had read in Harold's careful script. "You deserve better than what I can give. The money is yours to keep." Miriam had read those words 3 times before the meaning settled in her chest like a stone. 23 years since her Thomas passed, and she'd finally gathered the courage to say yes to another man's proposal. Harold owned the dry goods store 2 towns over, was a widower himself, and had courted her with the patient persistence of a man who understood that love at their age was different, quieter, more grateful, built on companionship rather than passion. Or so she'd thought. The humiliation had burned through her like prairie fire. She'd packed her few belongings that same evening, settled her account with Mrs. Patterson, and ridden out at dawn. Where to, she hadn't known. Only that she couldn't bear the sympathetic looks and whispered conversations that would follow her like smoke for months to come. Now, 3 days of hard riding had brought her to this dusty crossroads town where nobody knew her story. The stage stop her parents had built and run for 15 years stood empty, 20 miles north, abandoned since their deaths 5 years ago. She'd avoided it all this time, unable to face the memories. But maybe it was time to stop running from the past and start building something from it. The livestock auction was already underway when she arrived. A small crowd had gathered around the wooden platform where Murphy stood with his ledger, calling out bids for a spotted pig that squealed and tried to escape its rope. The smell of dust and animals mixed with the tobacco smoke from the men's pipes, creating a haze that made everything seem dreamlike and distant. Miriam tied her mare to the hitching post and moved closer to the crowd. She needed a milk cow, something practical to help her survive if she decided to try making a go of the old stage stop. The thought terrified and thrilled her in equal measure. At 53, most women her age were settled into their routines, surrounded by grandchildren and the comfortable predictability of established life. But here she was, contemplating starting over from nothing. "Next lot," Murphy called out, and the crowd's attention shifted to a man being led onto the platform. Miriam's breath caught in her throat. The man was tall and broad-shouldered, with skin the color of rich coffee and hands that looked strong enough to break chains, but gentle enough to hold something precious. Someone had draped a length of chain across his bare chester, cruel mockery meant to emphasize his status as property. His pants were rough canvas, patched in several places, and his feet were bare against the wooden platform. But it was his face that made Miriam's heart clench. Despite the degradation of his circumstances, he held his head high. His dark eyes met the jeering crowd without flinching, and there was something in his expression that spoke of dignity that could not be bought or sold, no matter what papers said otherwise. Here's Ox, Murphy announced, and several men in the crowd laughed. Good for heavy work. Knows his way around horses and cattle. Strong as his name suggests. We'll start the bidding at $5. The man's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly at the name, but he didn't protest. Miriam found herself studying his face, wondering what his real name was, what stories lay behind those steady eyes. $5, called out a voice from the back. 7, someone else countered. The bidding was sluggish, and Miriam realized why. The man was older than most would want. She guessed him to be in his 50s, like herself, and there was something in his bearing that suggested he would not be easily broken to someone's will. The kind of men who usually bought human beings at auctions preferred younger, more malleable purchases. $8 came another bid, this one from a thin man with mean eyes who stood near the front of the crowd. The man on the platform, Ox, they called him, glanced at his potential buyer, and something flickered in his expression. Not fear, exactly, but a weary recognition. He'd been owned by cruel men before. Without thinking, Miriam heard her own voice ring out, $10. The crowd turned to look at her, and she felt heat rise in her cheeks. What was she doing? She'd come here for a milk cow, not a man. But something about the dignity in his posture, the quiet strength in his eyes, had called to something deep in her chest. Murphy looked surprised but pleased. $10 from the lady. Do I hear 11? The thin man scowled and shook his head. The other bidders seemed to lose interest. $10 was more than most were willing to pay for a man past his prime, no matter how strong he looked. $10 going once, Murphy called. Going twice. He paused, looking around the crowd. Sold to the lady for $10. The crowd began to disperse, some of the men casting curious glances at Miriam as they headed toward the saloon. She stood, frozen for a moment, hardly believing what she'd just done. $10, nearly a quarter of her money for a man she didn't know, whose name she didn't even know. Murphy approached her with his ledger. That'll be $10, ma'am. You'll need to sign for ownership transfer. Miriam opened her reticule with trembling fingers and counted out the silver coins. As Murphy prepared the papers, she looked up at the platform where the man still stood, waiting to learn his fate. Their eyes met, and she saw something there she hadn't expected, not gratitude, but a quiet assessment. He was trying to figure out what kind of person she was, what she might want from him. "What's your real name?" she asked, stepping closer to the platform. He looked surprised by the question. "Virgil," he said quietly. "Virgil Stokes." "How old are you, Virgil?" 56, ma'am. She nodded, making a decision that felt both terrifying and inevitable. "I'm Miriam Holt, and I have a proposition for you." Murphy finished with the papers and handed them to her. "He's all yours, ma'am. The chain comes with him." Miriam looked at the paper's official documents that said she now owned another human being and felt sick. She folded them carefully and approached the platform where Virgil still waited. "Step down," she said gently. He climbed down from the platform, the chain across his chest catching the afternoon light. Up close, she could see the scars on his shoulders and arms, evidence of years of hard labor and probably harder treatment. But she could also see the intelligence in his eyes, the careful way he held himself. "Hold out your hands," she said. He extended his hands, and she placed the folded papers in his palms, his brow furrowed in confusion. "Those are your freedom papers," she said. "You're a free man, Virgil Stokes." He stared at the papers, then at her, then back at the papers. "I don't understand." "I bought you to set you free. No one should be owned by another person." "But," he shook his head, "why would you do that? You don't know me." "Because it was the right thing to do." She paused, gathering her courage. "But I do have that proposition, if you're willing to listen." He was still staring at the papers in his hands, as if they might disappear. "What kind of proposition?" "I own a stage. Stop about 20 miles north of here. It's been empty for 5 years, probably falling apart. I'm thinking of trying to fix it up, make it work again. I could use a partner, someone who knows about building and repairs, who's not afraid of hard work. A partner? Equal shares. You help me get the place running, and you can claim a stake in whatever we build. Your own land, your own future. Virgil looked at her for a long moment, and she saw him struggling to process what she was offering. Freedom was one thing, but partnership, equality, after years of being treated as property, it probably seemed impossible. Why? He asked finally. Because I'm 53 years old, and I just got left at the altar by a man who decided I wasn't worth the trouble. Because I'm tired of being afraid and tired of being alone. Because maybe two people who've been knocked down can help each other get back up. She saw something shift in his expressione, cautious hope that he was trying not to let show. This stage, stop, what condition is it in? Honestly, I don't know. I haven't seen it since my parents died. Could be nothing left but foundation stones for all I know. And you want to rebuild it? I want to try, but I can't do it alone. Virgil folded the papers carefully and tucked them into his pocket. Then he reached up and lifted the chain from around his neck, letting it fall to the dusty ground with a metallic clatter. My name is Virgil Stokes, he said, standing straighter, and I accept your proposition, Miss Holt. It's Mrs. Holtim, a widow, but you can call me Miriam. Miriam. He tried the name, and she liked the way it sounded in his deep voice. When do we start? How about now? I've got supplies to buy, and then we can ride out and see what we're working with. As they walked toward Murphy's store, Miriam felt something she hadn't experienced in years: excitement about the future. She'd come to this dusty town looking for a milk cow, and found instead a partner in the most unlikely of circumstances. Whether they could actually make a go of rebuilding the stage stop remained to be seen, but for the first time since Harold's cowardly note, she felt like she was moving towards something instead of running away from it. The afternoon sun was warm on her face as she and Virgil began planning their uncertain future, and despite all the reasons it shouldn't work, Miriam found herself believing that maybe, just maybe, it would. The first week at the stage stop had settled into a rhythm that surprised them both with its naturalness. Miriam rose before dawn to start the coffee and prepare breakfast, while Virgil tended to the horses and surveyed the day's work. The adobe building was in better condition than she'd feared. The walls were solid, the roof needed patching but was structurally sound, and the well still drew sweet water. Virgil had proven to be everything she'd hoped for as a partner and more. His hands were skilled with tools, his knowledge of construction and repair extensive, and he worked with a quiet efficiency that got things done without fuss. More importantly, he treated her with a respectful deference that never felt subservient. He asked her opinion, offered suggestions, and made decisions about the work without constantly seeking her approval. They developed an easy pattern of conversation during meals and evening hours. Virgil was a good listener, asking thoughtful questions about her life with Thomas, her grown children who lived back east, and her dreams for the stage stop. In return, he'd begun sharing pieces of his own story, his childhood on a farm in Missouri, his years as a ranch hand before circumstances led to his enslavement, his skill with horses and cattle. The freedom papers remained carefully folded in his shirt pocket, and Miriam had noticed him touching them occasionally, as if reassuring himself they were real. She understood the gesture. After years of being owned, the concept of legal freedom must feel fragile, something that could be taken away as easily as it had been given. This morning, like every other, they'd worked side by side patching the roof. Virgil had fashioned a ladder from fallen timber, and they'd spent the morning replacing broken tiles and sealing gaps with adobe mortar. The work was hot and dusty, but there was satisfaction in seeing the visible progress they were making. "Hand me that bucket," Virgil said, reaching down from his perch on the roof edge. Miriam lifted the bucket of mortar, their fingers brushing as he took it from her. The contact sent a small jolt through her that she tried to ignore. In the week they'd been working together, she'd become increasingly aware of him as a manth, way his shoulders moved when he lifted heavy beams, the deep rumble of his laugh when something amused him, the gentle way he spoke to the horses. She was still lost in these thoughts when the sound of approaching hoofbeats made them both freeze. 3 riders were coming up the dusty track from the south, and something about their posture suggested this wasn't a social call. "Get down from there," Miriam said quietly, and Virgil climbed down the ladder with deliberate calm. The riders drew rein in front of the stage stop, and Miriam's heart sank as she recognized the man in the center. It was Jake Morrison, a rough-looking character with pale eyes and a mouth that seemed permanently twisted in a sneer. She'd seen him at the auction, watching the proceedings with the calculating gaze of a man who made his living off other people's misfortune. "Well, well," Morrison said, dismounting with theatrical slowness. "Look what we have here. The lady who thinks she can buy herself a pet." The 2 men with him, obviously his brothers based on their similar sharp features and mean expressions, spread out slightly, flanking Virgil. All 3 wore guns, and their hands rested casually near their holsters. "This is private property," Miriam said, stepping forward. "You're not welcome here." Morrison laughed, a sound like gravel in a tin cup. "Private property? That's rich, coming from someone harboring stolen goods." "I don't know what you're talking about." "Oh, I think you do." Morrison's pale eyes fixed on Virgil. "There's Ox. He belongs to us." "His name is Virgil Stokes," Miriam said firmly. "And he doesn't belong to anyone. I have his freedom papers." "Freedom papers?" Morrison's grin widened. "You mean these?" He pulled a folded document from his jacket and waved it in the air. "These here are the real papers. Says we own him legal and proper. Paid good money for him up in Kansas before he ran off." Virgil's jaw tightened, but he didn't speak. Miriam could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his hands had clenched into fists. "That's impossible," she said. "I bought him at legal auction in Dust Bottle Crossing. Murphy had all the proper documentation." "Murphy's a fool who don't know proper paperwork from a grocery list," Morrison spat. Here's a runaway slave, and we're taking him back." "Show me those papers," Miriam demanded. Morrison's expression grew ugly. "I don't have to show you nothing, lady, but I'll tell you what I will do. I'll give you $5 for your trouble, and we'll call it even." "No." The word came out harder than she'd intended, and all 3 men's attention sharpened on her. She felt Virgil shift slightly beside her, moving closer in a protective gesture that both warmed and worried her. "No," Morrison repeated, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "You sure about that?" "I'm sure. Virgil is a free man. He stays here." "Virgil, is it?" Morrison's gaze shifted to him. "You got yourself a real champion there, boy. But here's the thing." He took a step closer. "I don't much care what some dried-up old spinster thinks about anything. You're coming with us." The lady said no, Virgil said quietly, speaking for the first time since the men had arrived. Morrison's face flushed red. "The lady don't get a say in this, and neither do you." "I think they do." All eyes turned to see another rider approaching, an older man with a tin star pinned to his vest. Miriam's heart sank as she recognized Sheriff Crenshaw from Dust Bottle Crossing. He was known to be honest but easily influenced by anyone with money or connections. "Sheriff," Morrison said, his tone suddenly respectful. "Good thing you're here. This woman's harboring a runaway slave." Crenshaw dismounted and approached the group with obvious reluctance. "Mrs. Holt, I understand you purchased this man at auction last week." "That's right, Sheriff. I have the papers to prove it." "Papers don't mean much if they're based on false premises," Morrison interjected. "Show him the real documents, Jake." Morrison produced his papers again, and Crenshaw examined them with a frown. "These look official enough. Says here this man is property of the Morrison brothers, registered in Kansas territory." "Murphy assured me the sale was legal," Miriam protested. "Murphy's not a lawyer," Crenshaw said uncomfortably, "and these gentlemen have a prior claim." Virgil stepped forward. "Sheriff, I can prove those papers are false. I was never owned by these men. I was working as a free ranch hand when they—" "Nobody asked you to speak, boy," Morrison snarled. "Let him finish," Miriam said. "No point in listening to lies," Morrison said. "Sheriff, we're taking what's ours. You can either help us or get out of the way." Crenshaw looked torn. glancing between the papers in his hands and the tense faces around him. "I'm afraid I have to side with the documentation. If these papers are legitimate—" "They're not," Miriam said desperately. "Anyone can see those are forgeries." "That's a serious accusation," Crenshaw warned. "It's a serious situation," she replied. "You can't just let them take him." "I'm not letting anyone take anyone," Crenshaw said defensively. "I'm enforcing the law as I understand it." Morrison nodded to his brothers, and they moved toward Virgil. "Come on, Ox. Time to go." "Wait," Miriam said, panic rising in her chest. "There has to be another way to resolve this, some kind of hearing or—" "No hearing needed," Morrison said. "The law's the law." Virgil looked at her, and she saw something in his eyes that made her chest tighten. He was going to go with them. Not because he believed their claims, but because he was afraid of what they might do to her if he resisted. "Don't," she whispered. "It's all right," he said quietly. "I'll be all right." "No, you won't." Morrison produced a length of rope. "Hold out your hands." Virgil glanced at Miriam one more time, then extended his hands. As Morrison bound his wrists, Virgil's fingers brushed his shirt pocket, the pocket where he kept his freedom papers. "Don't lose hope," he told her quietly. "Enough talking," Morrison said, pulling the rope tight. "Let's go." As they prepared to leave, Morrison turned back to Miriam with a cruel smile. "You'd best forget about this place, lady. Lot of accidents can happen to a woman alone out here. Might be safer for you to head back to town." "Is that a threat?" "It's friendly advice." They mounted up, pulling Virgil up behind one of the brothers. As they rode away, Miriam stood frozen in the dusty yard, watching the only real hope she'd had in years disappear into the distance. The sheriff lingered uncomfortably. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Holt, but the law is supposed to protect people, not enable kidnappers. Those papers looked legitimate to me." "Then you're a fool or a coward." "Probably both." Crenshaw's face reddened, but he didn't argue. He mounted his horse and rode away, leaving Miriam alone with the half-repaired stage stop and a future that suddenly seemed empty and pointless. She stood there for a long time, staring at the spot where they'd disappeared, feeling the weight of 53 years and too many disappointments. Then she walked over to where Morrison had bound Virgil's hands and picked up a small piece of paper that had fallen from his pocket. It was a corner of his freedom papers, torn off deliberately, a message that said he hadn't given up, that he still believed in the possibility of freedom. Miriam folded the paper carefully and put it in her own pocket. If Virgil wasn't ready to give up, then neither was she. The silence at the stage stop was deafening. For 3 days, Miriam had moved through the motions of daily life like a woman walking through molasses. She fed the horses, cooked simple meals she barely tasted, and worked on small repairs that didn't require the strength or knowledge that Virgil had brought to their partnership. But every task reminded her of his absence, and the future they'd begun to build together felt as fragile as morning frost. On the 4th morning, she woke to the sound of hoofbeats and rushed outside, hope flaring in her chest. But it was only a traveling merchant with a wagon full of goods, stopping to water his horses and stretch his legs. "Morning, ma'am," he called out, tipping his hat. "This place open for business?" "Not yet," she replied, then hesitated. "Are you heading through Dust Bottle Crossing?" "I am indeed. You need something from town?" She pressed a silver dollar into his palm. "Ask around about the Morrison brothers. Find out what people know about them, where they're staying, what they're up to. And ask about a man named Virgil Stokestall, dark-skinned, about 56 years old. They took him 4 days ago." The merchant pocketed the coin. "I'll see what I can learn." After he left, Miriam threw herself into the work of preparing for Virgil's return, because she refused to believe he wouldn't return. She cleaned the small room they designated as his quarters, mended his extra shirt that had gotten torn on a nail, and continued the roof repairs as best she could manage alone. It was while she was struggling with a particularly heavy tile that she heard a familiar voice behind her. "Miriam, sweet Lord, what are you doing up there?" She turned to see her neighbor, Mrs. Elena Vasquez, standing in the yard with a basket over her arm. Elena and her husband Miguel owned the small ranch 5 miles to the east, and they'd been the first to welcome Miriam back to the area. "Elena, thank goodness," Miriam said, climbing down from the ladder. "I could use the company. Where's that partner of yours, Virgil?" The question hit like a physical blow. Gone. Taken by men who claimed they owned him. Elena's face darkened. "The Morrison brothers? You know them?" "Know of them. They've been making trouble all over the territory, claiming ownership of free blacks, forging papers, bribing officials. Miguel says they're working with a network of slavers who find people who've established new lives and drag them back into bondage." Miriam felt a chill that had nothing to do with the morning air. "Can anything be done?" "The law around here is weak, and the Morrisons have money to throw around." "But," Elena paused, studying Miriam's face, "you care about him, more than just as a business partner." It wasn't a question, and Miriam felt heat rise in her cheeks. "He's a good man. He doesn't deserve what they're doing to him." "No, he doesn't, but that's not what I asked." Miriam looked away, unable to meet Elena's knowing gaze. "I don't know what you mean." "I think you do. I saw the way you two looked at each other at the Hendersons' barn raising last week, like you were already family." The memory made Miriam's chest tighten. They'd gone to help the Hendersons raise their new barn, and she'd watched with pride as Virgil worked alongside the other men, his skill and strength earning their respect. More than once, she'd caught him looking at her across the work site, and the warmth in his expression had made her feel like a young woman again. "It doesn't matter now," she said quietly. "He's gone. Maybe not forever." Elena set down her basket and pulled out a worn leather book. "This was my mother's recipe book. She taught me that food is love made visible, and that sharing meals builds the strongest bonds between people." Miriam accepted the book, running her fingers over the soft leather cover. "Elena, I can't." "You can, and you will, because when Virgil comes back, and he will come back, you're going to need to know how to feed him properly. A man who's been through what he's been through needs nurturing, not just shelter." "What makes you think he'll come back?" Elena smiled. "Because he left something worth returning for." That evening, Miriam sat by the fire with Elena's recipe book open in her lap. The pages were filled with carefully written instructions for everything from simple stews to elaborate feast dishes, all in Elena's mother's careful script. Many of the recipes were in Spanish, but Elena had translated them into English in the margins. As she read, Miriam found herself imagining Virgil sitting across from her, trying to puzzle out the words. In their brief week together, she'd begun teaching him to read using an old primer she'd found among her mother's things. He'd been a quick learner, hungry for knowledge, and she'd enjoyed watching his face light up when he successfully worked through a difficult passage. The next morning brought the traveling merchant back, and with him, disturbing news. "The Morrison brothers are holed up at the Silver Dollar Saloon," he reported. "They've got your friend locked up in the back room, and they're planning to move him south to Kansas in a few days. Word is they've got a buyer lined up." Miriam's blood ran cold. "What about the sheriff?" "Sheriff Crenshaw's been bought off, near as I can tell. The Morrisons are spreading money around town, telling everyone they're legitimate businessmen recovering stolen property. And people believe them. People believe what they want to believe, especially when money's involved. But," he paused, glancing around to make sure they weren't overheard, "there's talk among some of the decent folks in town. The preacher's been asking questions about the Morrisons' claims, and Doc Peterson says the whole thing stinks to high heaven." "Thank you," Miriam said, pressing another coin into his hand. "If you hear anything else, I'll let you know." After he left, Miriam paced the yard, her mind racing. She couldn't just sit here waiting for help that might never come. Virgil was in danger, and every day that passed brought him closer to being sold again. She was still pacing when Elena arrived with a basket of fresh tortillas and a determined expression. "I've been thinking about your situation," Elena said without preamble, "and I have an idea." "What kind of idea?" "The kind that might get your man back." Miriam's heart jumped. "Tell me." "Tomorrow is market day in Dust Bottle Crossing. Miguel and I always go to sell our vegetables and buy supplies. You could come with us, and while we're there, you could visit Virgil. The Morrisons won't let me see him." "They will if you're bringing them food." Every man in that saloon will be hungry, and a woman with a basket of fresh cooking doesn't look like a threat. Miriam considered this. What would be the point? I couldn't help him escape in broad daylight. No, but you could give him hope, and maybe you could learn something useful about their plans. It's too dangerous. So is letting them take him away without a fight. Elena was right, and they both knew it. Miriam looked at the recipe book in her hands, then at the partially repaired stage stop around them. Without Virgil, none of this meant anything. What would I cook? Elena smiled. Leave that to me. I know exactly what will get us through that door. That night, Miriam sat by the fire with the recipe book, studying the ingredients and methods for Elena's mother's famous empanadas. The recipe was complex, requiring skill and patience, but Elena had assured her that no man could resist them. As she read, she found herself thinking about Virgil's large hands, trying to hold the small primer, the way he'd mouth the words silently before speaking them aloud. The pride in his voice when he'd successfully read an entire sentence without help. Tomorrow, she would see him again. Tomorrow, she would begin fighting for the future they'd started to build together. And if Elena's mother's empanadas were as good as advertised, she might just have a chance. The empanadas were perfect golden brown crescents, filled with savory beef and spices that made the entire Silver Dollar saloon fall silent when Miriam entered with her basket. Elena had been right about the power of good food to open doors. Even Jake Morrison looked up from his card game with interest when the aroma reached him. Well, well, Morrison said, setting down his cards. If it isn't the do-gooder lady, what brings you to our humble establishment? I brought food, Miriam said simply, lifting the cloth from her basket. Fresh empanadas. I thought you and your men might be hungry. The other men at the table leaned forward, and she could see the hunger in their eyes. They'd been living on saloon fare for days, and the smell of Elena's mother's recipe was clearly having an effect. That's mighty thoughtful of you, Morrison said, his tone cautious. But I'm wondering what you want in return. Nothing, just being neighborly. Neighborly, Morrison laughed. Lady, you tried to steal our property. That's not what I'd call neighborly. I tried to help a man who needed help. There's a difference. Not in the eyes of the law. Miriam set the basket on the table. The law says a lot of things. It also says Christians should show mercy to those in need. You preaching to us now? I'm feeding you. What you do with that kindness is up to you. Morrison studied her for a long moment, then nodded to one of his brothers. Check the back room. Make sure our guest is secure. As the brother left, Morrison picked up one of the empanadas and bit into it. His eyes widened slightly, and despite himself, he nodded appreciatively. That's good cooking. Where'd you learn to make these? A friend taught me. She says food is love made visible. Love, huh? Morrison's tone turned mocking. That what you felt for our boy? Love. Miriam felt heat rise in her cheeks, but kept her voice steady. I felt respect for a man who'd been treated badly, and hoped that we could build something good together. Build what? A life? With a slave? With a free man. A partner. Morrison's brother returned and nodded. All secure, Jake. Good. Morrison finished his empanada and reached for another. You know, lady, I almost feel sorry for you, getting all attached to something that was never yours to begin with. He's not something, he's someone. Not according to the law. The law has been wrong before. Morrison's eyes hardened. Careful, lady. That kind of talk can get you in trouble. I'm already in trouble. A good man is locked up in your back room, and you're planning to sell him to someone who'll work him to death. That's his purpose. That's what he's for. He's for whatever he chooses to be for, just like you, just like me. Morrison stood up, his chair scraping against the wooden floor. I think you've overstayed your welcome. I haven't seen him yet. And you're not going to. 5 minutes, that's all I'm asking. And what do I get for those 5 minutes? Miriam reached into her basket and pulled out a small wooden object. This. Morrison took it, turning it over in his hands. It was a cross, about 4 inches long, carved from apple wood with careful attention to detail. The surface was smooth and warm, and the proportions were perfect. Where'd you get this? Virgil made it. He carved it from a branch of the apple tree we planted together. Morrison examined the cross more closely. He did this. This is fine work. He's skilled with his hands, good at building things, making things. That's what he should be doing with his life. What he should be doing is what his owner tells him to do. You're not his owner, you're his kidnapper. Morrison's face flushed, and for a moment Miriam thought he might strike her. But then he looked at the cross again, and something in his expression shifted. 5 minutes, he said finally, but one of my brothers stays with you the whole time. Thank you. The back room of the Silver Dollar was little more than a storage closet, with a narrow window set high in the wall. Virgil sat on a wooden crate, his hands bound with rope, his head bowed. When the door opened and light spilled in, he looked up, and Miriam's heart clenched at the weariness in his eyes. Miriam? He struggled to his feet. What are you doing here? Bringing you food. She held out one of the empanadas. Elena taught me to make these. He took the pastry awkwardly with his bound hands and bit into it. His eyes closed as he chewed, and she saw some of the tension leave his shoulders. It's good, he said. Real good. I brought you something else. She pulled out a small object wrapped in cloth. I hope you don't mind. I went into your room to get it. She unwrapped the cloth to reveal a small leather-bound book, the primer she'd been teaching him to read with. His eyes widened. They'll never let me keep it. They don't have to know about it. She glanced at Morrison's brother, who was watching them from the doorway. Can you hide it? Maybe. He moved closer, lowering his voice. Miriam, you need to stay away from here. These men are dangerous. I know. But I'm not giving up on you. You should. They're planning to move me tomorrow night, taking me south to Kansas. I won't let that happen. How can you stop it? You're just one woman. I'm not alone. Elena and Miguel are helping me, and there are others in town who know what's really happening. Virgil's expression grew concerned. Don't put yourself in danger for me. Why not? You do the same for me. That's different. No, it's not. We're partners, remember. Equal shares. He looked at her for a long moment, and she saw hope struggling with despair in his eyes. I wish. Time's up, Morrison's brother called from the doorway. Virgil quickly tucked the book inside his shirt, then moved closer to Miriam. The cross, did you give it to him? Yes. He seemed impressed by your work. Good. Maybe. He paused, then spoke more quietly. There's something carved on the back, small letters. Make sure you remember them. Before she could ask what he meant, Morrison's brother stepped forward. Let's go, lady. You've had your 5 minutes. As they left the back room, Miriam tried to process what Virgil had said about the cross. She'd examined it carefully before giving it to Morrison, but she hadn't noticed any letters on the back. What message had he managed to carve into the wood? Back in the main saloon, Morrison was finishing his third empanada. Your boy's got talent, he said. This is fine carving work. He's very skilled. Might be worth keeping him around for a while. A man who can make things like this could be useful. He'd be even more useful as a free man, building his own life. Morrison's expression hardened again. We've been through this, lady. The law is the law. The law isn't always right. Right or wrong, it's still the law. Miriam gathered her empty basket and prepared to leave. Thank you for letting me see him. Don't make a habit of it. I won't need to. Morrison looked at her sharply. What's that supposed to mean? It means I have faith that justice will prevail. Justice already has prevailed. We got our property back. We'll see. As Miriam walked toward the door, she heard Morrison call out behind her. Lady? She turned back. Next time you make those empanadas, bring more. The boys really enjoyed them. I'll remember that. Outside, Elena and Miguel were waiting with their wagon. As they drove away from town, Miriam told them about her conversation with Virgil and his cryptic message about the cross. Letters carved on the back? Elena mused. What could they mean? I don't know, but he seemed to think they were important. We'll figure it out, Miguel said, but right now we need to focus on stopping them from taking him to Kansas. How do we do that? We get help, real help, from people who understand what's really happening here. As they drove back toward the stage stop, Miriam found herself thinking about the hope she'd seen in Virgil's eyes when she'd given him the primer. Despite everything, he still believed in the possibility of freedom, of a future where he could choose his own path. That hope was worth fighting for, and tomorrow she would begin the fight in earnest. The letters carved on the back of the cross spelled out JH 1847, a discovery that Elena made by candlelight that evening, turning the wooden cross over and over in her hands until the faint scratches revealed themselves in the flickering flame. JH 1847, she read aloud. What do you think it means? Miriam took the cross, running her fingertip over the barely visible letters. I don't know, but Virgil wanted me to remember them. He must have carved them there for a reason. Maybe they're initials, someone important to him. Or maybe they're evidence of some kind, something that proves the Morrison brothers are lying about owning him. Miguel looked up from cleaning his rifle. Either way, we need to act soon. I heard in town today that they're planning to move him tomorrow night, just like he said. The weight of that deadline pressed down on Miriam like a physical force. Tomorrow night. Less than 24 hours to find a way to help Virgil before he disappeared forever into the brutal machinery of slavery. There's something else, she said quietly. Something I haven't told you. Elena and Miguel both looked at her expectantly. When I was in that back room with Virgil, I saw something in his eyes. He's given up hope that he'll ever be truly free. He's accepted that this is his fate. That's not true, Elena protested. You said he seemed hopeful. Hopeful that I'd be safe, hopeful that I'd move on with my life, but not hopeful for himself. Miriam's voice caught. I think he's planning to do something desperate. Something to protect me, even if it costs him everything. Miguel set down his rifle. What kind of something? I don't know, but I know Virgil. He'd rather die than let harm come to someone he cares about. The room fell silent as the implications of that statement settled over them. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the windows of the stage stop and carrying the scent of rain. We need to get word to Judge Harrison, Miguel said finally. He's the only one with the authority to override Sheriff Crenshaw and investigate the Morrison brothers' claims. Judge Harrison is in the county seat, Elena pointed out. That's a 2-day ride. Then we'd better start riding tonight. No, Miriam said firmly. I won't leave while Virgil is in danger. If something happens to him while I'm gone, if something happens to him while you're here, you'll be powerless to stop it, Miguel interrupted. But if you can bring back legitimate legal authority, it'll be too late. Maybe not. If we can delay their departure somehow. How? They're not going to listen to reason, and they're armed. Elena stood up abruptly. I have an idea. It's risky, but it might work. What kind of idea? Miriam asked. The kind that involves more empanadas and a few other things. 2 hours later, Miriam found herself standing outside the Silver Dollar again, but this time she wasn't alone. Elena had insisted on coming with her, and Miguel waited in the shadows across the street with 3 other men from the neighboring ranches, all of them armed and ready to act if things went wrong. You sure about this? Elena whispered as they approached the saloon doors. No, but it's the only plan we have. Remember, we need to keep them talking long enough for Miguel to get into position. Miriam nodded, then pushed through the doors with Elena close behind. The saloon was more crowded than it had been that morning, and the air was thick with tobacco smoke and the smell of whiskey. Jake Morrison looked up from his card game as they entered, and his eyes narrowed when he saw the large basket Elena carried. Well, the empanada lady is back, and she brought a friend. I brought more food, Miriam said, forcing a smile, and I wanted to introduce you to Elena Vasquez. She's the one who taught me to make those empanadas you enjoyed. Elena stepped forward with a gracious nod. Senor Morrison, I hope you don't mind the intrusion, but I wanted to meet the men who appreciated my mother's recipe so much. Morrison's suspicion seemed to ease slightly at Elena's warm tone. Your mother's recipe? It was mighty fine cooking. Gracias. She always said that good food brings people together, breaks down barriers between them. That's a nice sentiment, Senora. But some barriers are put there by law. See, the law. But the law is made by men, and men can be wrong, no. Morrison's brothers exchanged glances, and Miriam saw them tense. This was dangerous ground. The law is the law, Morrison said firmly. Right or wrong doesn't enter into it. Of course, Elena agreed smoothly. But I am curious about something. This man you claim to own, what is his story? How did he come to be your property? That's not your concern, Signora. Perhaps not, but I am a curious woman, and I have lived in this territory for many years. I have seen many things, heard many stories, some of them very sad. What kind of stories? Elena set down her basket and pulled out a photographer-faded image of a young man in work clothes, standing beside a woman and two small children. This is my nephew, Joaquin. He was taken by men like you 5 years ago. They said he was a runaway slave, but he was born free in California. We never saw him again. The photograph had the desired effect. Morrison's brothers leaned forward to look at it, and even Morrison himself seemed momentarily affected by the image of the young family. That's unfortunate, Morrison said carefully, but it has nothing to do with our situation. Doesn't it? You see, when men make their living stealing other men's freedom, they must have many such stories, many families destroyed, many lives ruined. We're not stealing anything. We're recovering our lawful property. Ah, yes, your property. Tell me, Signor Morrison, what did you pay for this man? When did you buy him? Morrison's face flushed. That's none of your business. I am simply curious about the business of buying and selling human beings. It must be very profitable, no? Profitable enough. And this man, Virgil, I think his name Ish has been your property for how long? Long enough. Elena nodded as if satisfied. And before he was your property, where did he work? What did he do? He worked for us. That's all you need to know. But surely he had a life before. Family, perhaps? Children? Morrison's jaw tightened. Look, Signora, I don't know what game you're playing, but no game. I am simply a woman who has lost family to men like you, trying to understand how such things happen. Such things happen because the law allows them to happen. The law. Yes, we keep coming back to that. Elena reached into her basket and pulled out a sheet of paper. Speaking of the law, I found something interesting in my husband's papers. A bill of sale from 1847. Morrison's eyes sharpened. What kind of bill of sale? For a man named Virgil Stokes. Sold to one J.H. Morrison in Kansas Territory. But here is the curious thing, the signature at the bottom is not yours. Morrison's face went pale. Let me see that. Certainly. Elena held out the paper, but as Morrison reached for it, she pulled it back. But first, I would like to see your bill of sale, the one that proves you own this man. I don't have to show you anything. No, you don't. But it would be interesting to compare the two documents, don't you think? To see if they tell the same story. Morrison stood up abruptly, his chair falling backward. I think you ladies have overstayed your welcome. Perhaps. But I think my husband and his friends outside would disagree. The saloon suddenly felt very quiet. Morrison's brothers moved their hands closer to their guns, and several of the other patrons began easing toward the exits. You threatening us, Signora? Not threatening, simply pointing out that you are not the only ones in this territory who believe in justice. Morrison's eyes flicked toward the windows, and Miriam knew he was calculating his odds. Outside, Miguel and his men would be in position by now, ready to act if the situation escalated. What do you want? Morrison asked finally. We want to see your bill of sale, the real one. And if I refuse, then we will assume you have something to hide. Morrison stared at Elena for a long moment, then slowly reached into his jacket. But instead of pulling out papers, his hand emerged with a pistol. I think it's time for you ladies to leave. Elena didn't flinch. I think it's time for you to prove your claims are legitimate. The only thing I need to prove is that I'm not afraid to use this. Using that would be a mistake, Signor Morrison. A very serious mistake. We'll see about that. The tension in the room was thick enough to cut with a knife. Miriam found herself thinking about Virgil, locked in the back room, probably listening to every word. She hoped he would understand that whatever happened next, they had tried to help him. She hoped it wouldn't be too late. The standoff lasted only seconds before the saloon doors burst open and Miguel entered with his rifle trained on Morrison. Behind him came 3 other ranchers, all armed, all with the grim determination of men who had seen too much injustice. "Drop the gun, Morrison," Miguel said quietly. Morrison's eyes darted between the rifle pointed at his chest and his brothers, who were slowly reaching for their own weapons. "This is none of your business, Vasquez. When you threaten my wife, it becomes my business. Your wife came in here making accusations. My wife came in here asking to see legal documents. If your claims are legitimate, you should have no problem providing them." Morrison's grip tightened on his pistol. "I don't have to prove anything to you people." "Actually, you do." A new voice spoke from the doorway, and everyone turned to see a tall man in a dark coat enter the saloon. "I'm Judge Harrison, and I've been looking for you gentlemen." The air in the room seemed to crystallize. Judge Harrison was a legend in the territoria, man known for his integrity, his legal expertise, and his complete inability to be bought or intimidated. His presence changed everything. "Judge Harrison," Morrison said, his voice suddenly respectful, "what brings you to Dust Bottle Crossing?" "Reports of fraudulent slave documentation, kidnapping, corruption of local officials." Harrison's pale eyes swept the room, taking in every detail. "I understand you gentlemen have been making some interesting claims about ownership of a man named Virgil Stokes." "We have the papers to prove our ownership," Morrison said, but his voice lacked conviction. "I'm sure you do. I'd like to see them." Morrison hesitated, and Miriam saw sweat beading on his forehead. They're in our room upstairs." "Then let's go get them. And while we're at it, let's have a conversation with Mr. Stokes himself." "Now wait, just a minute." "No, Mr. Morrison. You wait." Harrison's voice carried the authority of decades on the bench. "You wait while I examine your documents, interview your supposed property, and determine whether you're legitimate businessmen or common criminals." Morrison's brothers exchanged nervous glances. The youngest one, who couldn't have been more than 20, was visibly trembling. "We don't have to submit to this," Morrison said. "We have rights. You have the right to present your case in a court of law. You have the right to legal representation. You do not have the right to hold a man against his will based on questionable documentation." "The documentation isn't questionable." "Then you won't mind if I examine it thoroughly." Harrison turned to Miguel. "Mr. Vasquez, would you and your men be so kind as to secure the back room? I believe that's where Mr. Stokes is being held." "It would be our pleasure, Judge." As Miguel and his men moved toward the back of the saloon, Morrison finally lowered his pistol. "This is all a misunderstanding. We're legitimate businessmen operating within the law." "Then you have nothing to worry about." Harrison's tone was mild, but his eyes were steel. "Mrs. Holt, I believe you're the one who purchased Mr. Stokes at auction." "Yes, sir, and I gave him his freedom immediately." "I see. And Mrs. Vasquez, I understand you have some documentary evidence of your own." Elena stepped forward, pulling the bill of sale from her basket. "See, Judge Harrison, this is most interesting reading." Harrison examined the document carefully, his expression growing more serious with each line. "This is a bill of sale for one Virgil Stokes, dated April 15, 1847, signed by one J.H. Morrison." Morrison's face went white. That's an old document. It has nothing to do with..." "It has everything to do with your current claims, Mr. Morrison, because according to this document, Virgil Stokes was sold to J.H. Morrison, your father, I presume, but there's a notation here that he was subsequently freed by the same J.H. Morrison in 1851. The silence in the saloon was deafening. Morrison's brothers looked at each other with growing panic. "There's more," Harrison continued. "There's a notation here that Mr. Stokes was given a letter of manumission and helped to relocate to Colorado Territory as a free man." "That's impossible," Morrison said, but his voice was barely a whisper. "Is it?" Then perhaps you can explain why your father would have kept such detailed records of a transaction that, according to you, never happened. From the back room came the sound of breaking wood, followed by Miguel's voice. "Judge Harrison, you need to see this." Harrison strode toward the back room, followed by the entire crowd. When they reached the doorway, they found Virgil sitting on his crate, his bound hands now free, holding a piece of paper that he extended toward the judge. "My name is Virgil Stokes," he said quietly, "and this is my letter of manumission, signed by J.H. Morrison on September 3, 1851. Harrison took the paper, examining it carefully. "This appears to be genuine. Where did you get this?" "I've carried it with me for 14 years, hidden in my boot." Virgil's voice was steady, but Miriam could see the emotion in his eyes. "J.H. Morrison was a good man. He freed me and 12 other slaves when he realized what he'd become. He gave us money, papers, and helped us start new lives." "That's a lie," Morrison shouted. "My father never." "Your father was dying when he freed me." Virgil continued. "He told me he couldn't face his maker, knowing he'd profited from human suffering. He made me promise to live a good life, to be worthy of the freedom he was giving me." Harrison looked up from the document. "Mr. Morrison, do you have any evidence that contradicts this testimony?" "Ew." Morrison's composure finally cracked. "He's our property. We have every right." "You have no rights here," Harrison said firmly. "Based on the evidence presented, Virgil Stokes has been a free man since 1850. 1. Your claims are not only false, they're criminal. You can't prove that." "I can and I will. Mr. Vasquez, please place these men under arrest for kidnapping, fraud, and conspiracy." As Miguel and his men moved to apprehend the Morrison brothers, Miriam found herself looking at Virgil. He was standing now, rubbing his wrists where the ropes had bound them, and there was something different about his posterior straightness, a dignity that came from having his freedom publicly acknowledged. "Virgil," she said, stepping toward him. He looked at her, and for the first time since she'd known him, she saw complete peace in his eyes. "Miriam, thank you." "For what?" "For believing I was worth saving." Judge Harrison approached them, still holding the manumission papers. "Mr. Stokes, I'll need you to come with me to the county seat. There will be legal proceedings, and your testimony will be crucial." "Of course, Judge. But first," Virgil turned to Miriam, "I have something to ask you." "What is it?" "Would you wait for me? At the stage, stop. I know it's a lot to ask, but—" "I'll wait," she said without hesitation. "However long it takes. It might be weeks, the legal process. I'll wait." He smiled then, the first genuine smile she'd seen from him since before the Morrison brothers had taken him. "Then I'll come back to you, and when I do, we'll finish what we started." "The stage, stop?" "Everything. The stage, stop, the apple orchard, the life we were building together." As they prepared to leave for the county seat, Elena approached Miriam with tears in her eyes. "You did it," she whispered. "You saved him." "We all did. We all saved him." "No, mija. You saved him the moment you saw him as a man instead of property. Everything else just followed from that." Miriam watched as Virgil walked out of the saloon a free man, his head held high, his future, his own to choose. In 3 weeks, maybe 4, he would come back to her. And when he did, they would have the rest of their lives to build something beautiful together. For the first time in months, Miriam felt genuine hope for the future. Not just hope, but excitement about what they would create. Together, 2 people who had found each other in the most unlikely circumstances and discovered that love could bloom at any age, under any conditions, when hearts were open and willing to risk everything for each other. 3 weeks had passed since Judge Harrison had taken Virgil to the county seat for the legal proceedings. 3 weeks of waiting, of working alone at the stage stop, of counting the days until he would return. Miriam had thrown herself into preparations for his homecoming, finishing the roof repairs, planting a small vegetable garden, and even attempting to clear more ground for the apple orchard they'd planned together. The work kept her hands busy, but her mind wandered constantly to courtrooms and legal procedures she couldn't quite imagine. Elena visited every few days with news from town, but there had been no word from the county seat. The uncertainty was becoming harder to bear with each passing day. On this particular morning, Miriam was replacing a broken window shutter when she heard the sound of approaching hoofbeats. Her heart leaped with hope that it might be Virgil, but the rhythm was wrong, too many horses, moving too fast. She set down her hammer and wiped her hands on her apron, walking out to meet whoever was coming. What she saw made her blood run cold. Sheriff Crenshaw was riding toward the stage stop, and behind him rode 4 men she didn't recognize. They were well-dressed, official-looking, and they carried themselves with the authority of men accustomed to being obeyed. "Mrs. Holt," Sheriff Crenshaw called out as they drew rein in front of the building. "I'm afraid I have some bad news." Miriam's heart began to race. "What kind of bad news?" "It's about your partner, Virgil Stokes. I'm sorry to tell you this, but he's been arrested." "Arrested? For what?" "Murder. He killed a man in the county seat 2 nights ago." The words hit Miriam like a physical blow. "That's impossible. Virgil would never—" "I'm afraid the evidence is pretty clear, ma'am. He was found standing over the body with a bloody knife in his hand." "I don't believe it. There has to be some mistake." One of the well-dressed men dismounted and approached her. "Mrs. Holt, I'm Deputy Marshal Williams. I'm sorry to be the bearer of bad news, but Mr. Stokes has confessed to the crime." "Confessed?" Miriam felt the world spinning around her. "No, that's impossible. Virgil wouldn't hurt anyone unless—" She stopped, realizing what she was about to say. "Unless what, ma'am?" "Unless he was protecting someone, or unless someone was trying to hurt him. According to the report, he attacked the victim without provocation. The man was unarmed." "I don't believe it. I want to see him." Deputy Marshal Williams exchanged glances with Sheriff Crenshaw. "I'm afraid that's not possible. He's being held pending trial, and visitors aren't allowed." "Then I want to speak to Judge Harrison." "Judge Harrison is the one who signed the arrest warrant." Miriam felt her knees go weak. If Judge Harrison, the man who had freed Virgil from the Morrison brothers, believed he was guilty of murder, then the evidence must be overwhelming. "There's something else, ma'am," Deputy Marshal Williams continued. "I'm afraid we're going to have to search these premises." "Search them? For what?" "Evidence. The victim was carrying a substantial amount of money when he was killed. It's missing." "You think Virgil robbed him?" "We think it's possible the money was brought here, or that there might be other evidence of criminal activity." Miriam watched in stunned silence as the men began searching the stage stop. They went through every room, every drawer, every possible hiding place. In Virgil's room, they found his few possessions and examined them carefully. In the kitchen, they checked every jar and container. It was Sheriff Crenshaw who made the discovery that changed everything. He was examining the area around the well when he called out to the others. "Marshal Williams, you need to see this." The marshal hurried over, followed by Miriam and the other men. Sheriff Crenshaw was holding a canvas bag, partially buried in the soft earth beside the well. "What is it?" Williams asked. "Money, a lot of it." Crenshaw opened the bag to reveal a substantial pile of gold coins. "This has to be what was stolen from the victim." "That's impossible," Miriam said, but her voice sounded weak even to herself. "Virgil would never." "Ma'am, I'm afraid the evidence speaks for itself." Deputy Marshal Williams turned to her with a grave expression. "I'm placing you under arrest as an accessory to murder and robbery." "What? No, you can't. You can't tell me you didn't know this money was here." "I didn't. I swear I didn't." But as they placed her hands in shackles, Miriam realized how it must look. A bag of gold coins buried beside the well at the stage stop, where she and Virgil had been working together. The timing was too convenient, the location too obvious. "Please," she said as they helped her onto a horse, "let me write a letter to my friend Elena. She'll know I'm innocent." "You can write all the letters you want from jail," Sheriff Crenshaw said, "but I don't think it's going to help much." As they rode away from the stage stop, Miriam's mind raced. Nothing about this made sense. Even if Virgil had killed someone, which she refused to believe, he would never have brought stolen money to the stage stop. He would never have put her in danger like that. Unless. The thought that came to her was so terrible she almost couldn't bear to consider it. What if Virgil had been protecting her? What if someone had threatened her, and he had acted to stop them? What if the whole thing was a setup, designed to frame them both? But who would do such a thing? The Morrison brothers were in jail. Judge Harrison was on their side. Who else would have reason to destroy them? The jail in Dust Bottle Crossing was a simple stone building with 3 cells. They put Miriam in the first one, and she could hear voices from the other cells. Apparently she wasn't the only person who'd been arrested recently. "Hey, lady," called a voice from the next cell. "You the one they say was working with that murdering slave?" "His name is Virgil Stokes," Miriam said firmly, "and he's not a murderer." "That's not what they're saying in town. They're saying he killed a government man, some kind of federal agent." "A federal agent?" That was new information. "What kind of federal agent?" "The kind that investigates fraud and corruption. Word is, he was looking into some kind of slave trading ring." Miriam's blood ran cold. A federal agent investigating slave trading. It was too much of a coincidence. Someone had killed the agent and framed Virgil for it, someone who had a lot to lose if the investigation continued. "When is the trial?" she asked. "Next week, probably. They're bringing in a special prosecutor from the territorial capital." "And Virgil, is he here?" "Nah, they got him locked up in the county seat. Too dangerous to transport, they said." Miriam sank onto the narrow cot in her cell, trying to process everything that had happened. 3 weeks ago, she'd been planning a future with Virgil. Now they were both in jail, accused of murder and robbery, facing the possibility of execution. But something about the whole situation felt orchestrated. The timing was too convenient, the evidence too neat. Someone had planned this carefully, and they'd played right into it. The question was who, and more importantly, how could she prove their innocence when all the evidence pointed to their guilt? As night fell over Dust Bottle Crossing, Miriam lay on her cot, staring at the ceiling, trying to figure out who would have the motive and the means to frame them so completely. The Morrison brothers were in jail, but they had connections. Other slave traders who might want to eliminate a federal agent and silence the people who had exposed the fraud. Or maybe it was someone else entirely, someone she hadn't even considered. The thought that kept coming back to her was the most disturbing one of all. What if they'd been watched from the beginning? What if someone had been planning this from the moment she'd bought Virgil's freedom at that auction? What if their entire relationship, the partnership, the growing closeness, the hope for a future together, had been nothing more than a trap waiting to spring shut? The possibility made her feel physically sick. But if it was true, then Virgil was as much a victim as she was, and somewhere out there, the real killer was free while they rotted in jail. She had to find a way to prove their innocence, not just for herself, but for Virgil, because if she didn't, they would both hang for crimes they didn't commit. And the person who had orchestrated this elaborate frame would get away with murder. The sound of footsteps in the jail corridor woke Miriam from a fitful sleep. Dawn light was filtering through the small barred window of her cell, and she could hear the familiar voice of Elena Vasquez speaking urgently to Sheriff Crenshaw. "I demand to see her immediately. She's innocent, and you know it." "Ma'am, I'm just doing my job. The evidence is fabricated, and if you had any sense, you'd see that." Miriam sat up on her cot as Elena appeared outside her cell, her face flushed with anger and determination. Behind her stood Miguel and another man. Miriam didn't recognize, a distinguished-looking gentleman with silver hair and intelligent eyes. "Miriam, Mija, are you all right?" Elena asked, gripping the bars. "I'm fine, but Elena, you have to believe me, I didn't know about that money. I would never—" "I know, Querida, I know." Elena turned to the silver-haired man. "Tell her." The man stepped forward. "Mrs. Holt, I'm Attorney Morrison, John Morrison." Miriam's heart stopped. "Morrison? Are you related to—" "Jake Morrison was my nephew, and I'm here to help you." "I don't understand." "My nephew was a criminal and a disgrace to the family name. But more than that, He was part of a larger conspiracy that has now cost the life of a federal agent. I've been investigating this network for months, and I believe you and Mr. Stokes have been framed. Sheriff Crenshaw shifted uncomfortably. Now see here, Morrison, you can't just come in here making accusations. I'm not making accusations, Sheriff. I'm stating facts. Facts that I intend to present to Judge Harrison when he arrives this afternoon. Judge Harrison is coming here? Miriam asked. He's coming for the preliminary hearing, and when he gets here, we're going to expose the real criminals in this case. Elena reached through the bars to squeeze Miriam's hand. Tell her about the letter. Attorney Morrison pulled a folded paper from his coat. 3 days ago, I received this letter from my nephew Jake. He wrote it from his cell in the county jail, apparently afraid for his life. In it, he confesses to being part of a slave-trading conspiracy that involved federal officials, corrupt judges, and a network of dealers throughout the territory. He implicated federal officials, including the man who was murdered. Agent Patterson wasn't investigating the slave trade, he was part of it. He was killed because he was threatening to expose his partners unless they gave him a larger share of the profits. Miriam felt a surge of hope. Then Virgil is innocent? Not only innocent, but he was likely the target of the real killer, someone who knew that framing him would eliminate a witness to their crimes and discredit the investigation into the slave trade. But the confession, they said he confessed to killing Agent Patterson. Attorney Morrison's expression grew grim. That confession was extracted under duress. Torture, to be precise. My sources tell me that Mr. Stokes was beaten until he agreed to sign a statement he couldn't even read. The image of Virgil being tortured made Miriam's stomach turn. How do we prove that? We have witnesses, other prisoners who saw what happened, and we have the medical evidence. Mr. Stokes' injuries are consistent with severe beatings, not with the kind of struggle that would occur during a murder. Sheriff Crenshaw was looking increasingly uncomfortable. You're talking about very serious allegations. I'm talking about a conspiracy that goes all the way to the territorial capital. A conspiracy that involves people you trust, Sheriff. People who have been using your jurisdiction to hide their crimes. Miguel stepped forward. Sheriff, Elena found something at the stage. Stop. Something that proves the money was planted there. What kind of something? Elena reached into her basket and pulled out a small object. This was buried with the money. A button from a federal agent's coat, but not Agent Patterson's coat, Agent Williams' coat. Miriam's blood ran cold. Deputy Marshal Williams, the man who arrested me. Not Deputy Marshal Williams, Attorney Morrison said. Agent Williams. He's been impersonating a federal officer for months, using forged credentials to give legitimacy to his activities. That's impossible, Sheriff Crenshaw protested. I've worked with Williams before. He's legitimate. Then explain this. Attorney Morrison produced another document. This is a telegram from the Federal Marshal's office in Denver. There is no Deputy Marshal Williams assigned to this territory. The real Deputy Marshal Williams died 6 months ago in a stagecoach accident. The jail cell seemed to spin around Miriam. Then the man who arrested me is the real killer. He murdered Agent Patterson to silence him, then framed Mr. Stokes to eliminate the most credible witness to the slave-trading conspiracy. But how did he know about the stage? Stop. How did he know to plant the money there? Because he's been watching you from the beginning. The entire scenario, the auction, the partnership, even the confrontation with my nephew was orchestrated to put you and Mr. Stokes in a position where you could be easily framed. Miriam felt sick. You're saying our entire relationship was a setup? No, Corrida, Elena said gently. Your relationship with Virgil was real, but it was being manipulated by people who wanted to use it against you. The question now, Attorney Morrison continued, is whether we can prove all of this before the fake Williams realizes we're onto him. Where is he now? Miguel asked. Sheriff Crenshaw looked nervous. He left town yesterday. Said he was going back to the county seat to prepare for the trial. He's not preparing for a trial, Attorney Morrison said. He's preparing to disappear, and probably to eliminate Mr. Stokes before he can testify. We have to stop him, Miriam said, gripping the bars of her cell. "We have to save Virgil." "We're going to," Elena assured her. "But first, we need to get you out of here." Sheriff Crenshaw shook his head. "I can't just release her. There are procedures." "Sheriff," Attorney Morrison said quietly, "I should mention that Judge Harrison is bringing federal marshals with him. Real federal marshals. When they arrive and discover that you've been harboring a murderer while keeping innocent people in jail, it's going to look very bad for you." "I didn't know." "Of course you didn't, but you can redeem yourself by releasing Mrs. Holt immediately and helping us apprehend the real criminal." Crenshaw hesitated, then reached for his keys. "I guess I can release her pending the hearing, but she'll have to stay in town." "She'll be staying with us," Elena said firmly. As the cell door swung open, Miriam felt a mixture of relief and urgency. She was free, but Virgil was still in danger, and somewhere out there, the fake Williams was probably already planning his next move. "How long do we have?" she asked as they left the jail. "Judge Harrison will be here in 4 hours, Attorney Morrison replied. "We need to have everything ready by then." "Ready for what?" "To catch a killer, and to save the man you love." They spent the next few hours at Elena's house, preparing for what Attorney Morrison called the most important legal proceeding of his career. Miguel and several other ranchers had volunteered to help, creating a network of watchers throughout the town. If the fake Williams returned, they would know immediately. But as the afternoon wore on, there was no sign of him. Judge Harrison arrived precisely on time, accompanied by 2 legitimate federal marshals and a stenographer. The preliminary hearing was scheduled to take place in Murphy's store, which had been cleared out and arranged with makeshift benches. "Where's the defendant?" Judge Harrison asked, as he reviewed the case files. "Still in the county seat," Sheriff Crenshaw replied. "Deputy Marshal Williams said it was too dangerous to transport him." "Deputy Marshal Williams," one of the federal marshals looked up. "There's no Deputy Marshal Williams assigned to this territory." "That's what we've been trying to tell you," Attorney Morrison said. "The man who arrested Mrs. Holt is an imposter, and he's the real killer." Judge Harrison's expression grew grave as he listened to the evidence. The letter from Jake Morrison, the testimony of the prisoners who had witnessed Virgil's torture, the planted evidence at the stage stoppage, all pointed to an elaborate frame-up. "This is very serious," Judge Harrison said finally. "If what you're saying is true, then Mr. Stokes is in immediate danger." "We need to get to the county seat," one of the federal marshals said. "Now." "I'm coming with you," Miriam said. "Ma'am, that's not advisable. If this man is as dangerous as we think, he's already tried to destroy my life and the life of the man I love. I'm not going to sit here while you try to save him." Judge Harrison looked at her for a long moment. "Very well, but you'll stay back and let the marshals do their job." As they prepared to leave, Elena pressed a small package into Miriam's hands. "For Virgil, when you find him." Miriam opened the package to find the wooden cross that Virgil had carved, along with a note in Elena's handwriting. "For the man who taught us all that love is worth fighting for." The ride to the county seat was the longest 2 hours of Miriam's life. With every mile, she worried that they would be too late, that the fake Williams would have already silenced Virgil permanently. But she also carried with her a growing sense of determination. For too long, she had been a victim of other people's schemes. Now, it was time to fight back. When they finally reached the county seat, the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and red. The courthouse loomed ahead of them, and somewhere inside, Virgil was waiting. Whether he was waiting for rescue or for death remained to be seen. The courthouse was eerily quiet as they approached, too quiet for a building that should have housed prisoners and guards. Judge Harrison and the 2 federal marshals exchanged concerned glances as they dismounted, their hands instinctively moving to their weapons. "Something's wrong," Marshal Brooks whispered, studying the darkened windows. "There should be lights, activity." "Maybe they're all in the back," Sheriff Crenshaw suggested, but his voice lacked conviction. "Or maybe we're too late," Miriam said, voicing the fear that gripped them all. Judge Harrison motioned for silence as they approached the main entrance. The heavy wooden door stood slightly ajar, and through the gap they could see the flickering light of a single lantern in the corridor beyond. Marshal Brooks drew his pistol and eased the door open. "Federal marshals," he called out. "Anyone in there?" No response. They entered cautiously, their footsteps echoing in the empty hallway. The courthouse smelled of dust and fear, and Miriam could feel her heart pounding as they made their way toward the jail cells in the back of the building. "Hello?" Marshal Brooks called again. "This is the Federal Marshal Service. Show yourselves." Still nothing. They reached the jail area to find the guard station empty, the keys hanging on their hook, as if whoever had been there had left in a hurry. The cells were arranged in a row, and most of them stood open and empty, except for the last one. "Virgil," Miriam whispered, rushing toward the cell despite Judge Harrison's attempt to hold her back. He was there, but barely recognizable. His face was swollen and bruised, his clothes torn and bloody. He sat slumped against the stone wall, his eyes closed, his breathing shallow. "Virgil," she called again, louder this time. His eyes fluttered open, and for a moment he looked confused. Then recognition dawned, and he struggled to sit up straighter. "Miriam, is it really you?" "It's me. We're here to get you out." Marshal Brooks was already working on the lock, while his partner examined Virgil's injuries. "This man needs a doctor," Marshal Davis said grimly. "These injuries are severe." "Can you travel?" Judge Harrison asked Virgil. "I can try." Virgil's voice was hoarse, barely above a whisper. "But you need to know, Williams isn't who he says he is. He's the one who killed Agent Patterson. And he's planning to kill you too." "We know," Miriam said, kneeling beside him as Marshal Brooks got the cell door open. "We figured it out. We're going to stop him." "You don't understand," Virgil said urgently. "He's not just planning to kill me. He's planning to kill all of you. Tonight. He knows you're coming." A chill ran down Miriam's spine. "How does he know?" "He has people everywhere. Sheriff Crenshaw." "Sheriff Crenshaw is with us," Judge Harrison interrupted. "No," Virgil said, shaking his head. "He's been working with Williams from the beginning. The whole thing was a setup." As if summoned by his words, they heard the sound of footsteps in the corridor behind them. Multiple sets of footsteps, moving with purpose. "That's impossible," Sheriff Crenshaw said, but his voice sounded different now, colder. "Sheriff Crenshaw has been nothing but helpful." Miriam turned to see Sheriff Crenshaw standing in the doorway, his gun drawn, and pointed at Judge Harrison. Behind him stood the fake Williams and 3 other men she didn't recognize. "I'm sorry it had to come to this," Crenshaw said, though he didn't sound sorry at all. "But you people just wouldn't leave well enough alone." "Sheriff," Judge Harrison said calmly, "put down your weapon. You're only making this worse for yourself." "Worse? Judge, I'm about to become a very rich man. Williams here has promised me a substantial share of the profits from the slave trade. All I had to do was keep the law off his back." "The slave trade is ending," Marshal Brooks said, his own gun trained on Crenshaw. "Times are changing." "Not fast enough," the fake Williams said, stepping forward. "There's still plenty of money to be made for those smart enough to see the opportunities." "By murdering federal agents?" Marshal Davis asked. "Patterson got greedy. He wanted a bigger cut, threatened to expose the whole operation. We couldn't let that happen. So you killed him and framed Virgil." It was perfect, really. A former slave with a history of violence found standing over the body of a federal agent. Who would question it? "We questioned it," Miriam said, helping Virgil to his feet, "and we proved you were lying." Williams laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "You proved nothing. You're all going to die here tonight. And tomorrow the official story will be that you tried to help a murderer escape and were killed in the attempt." "People know where we are," Judge Harrison said. "They'll come looking for us." "Let them come. By the time they get here, we'll be long gone with a very nice profit from selling Mr. Stokes here back into slavery." "Over my dead body," Miriam said. "That can be arranged," Williams replied, drawing his own gun. The standoff stretched taut as a bowstring, 6 guns drawn, pointed at each other in the narrow confines of the jail. One wrong move, one nervous finger, and people would die. "You know," Virgil said quietly. "There's something you should know about that federal agent you killed." "What's that?" "He wasn't the only one investigating your operation." William's eyes narrowed. "What do you mean?" "I mean, you should have looked more carefully at who was in the cells around me. Some very interesting people have been listening to your conversations." As if on cue, they heard the sound of more footsteps in the corridor. But these were different, organized, purposeful, and coming from multiple directions. "Federal marshals," a voice called out. "The building is surrounded. Drop your weapons and come out with your hands up." William's face went pale. "That's impossible. We killed all the marshals." "No," Judge Harrison said with a slight smile. "You killed one marshal, but there are a lot more where he came from." The fake Williams looked around wildly, realizing that his carefully laid trap had become a trap for him instead. The sound of footsteps was getting closer, and there was nowhere to run. "Drop your weapons," the voice called again. "You have 10 seconds to comply." William's hand tightened on his gun, and Miriam could see the desperation in his eyes. He was going to fight rather than surrender, which meant that in the next few seconds, everything would either be over or just beginning. The explosion of gunfire in the confined space of the jail was deafening. Miriam threw herself over Virgil, protecting him with her body as bullets flew in all directions. The fake Williams had opened fire first, his desperation overriding any sense of self-preservation, and the others had responded instantly. When the shooting stopped, the air was thick with gunpowder smoke and the ringing echoes of gunshots. Miriam raised her head cautiously, her ears still ringing, to assess the damage. Sheriff Crenshaw lay motionless on the floor, blood pooling beneath him. The fake Williams was slumped against the wall, clutching his shoulder and cursing viciously. 2 of his men were down, and the third had his hands raised in surrender. Marshal Brooks was checking on his partner, who had taken a bullet in the leg but was still conscious. Judge Harrison appeared unharmed, though his face was pale with shock. "Are you hurt?" Miriam asked Virgil, running her hands over him to check for new injuries. "I'm all right," he said, though his voice was strained. "Are you?" "I'm fine." She helped him sit up against the wall, then looked around at the aftermath of the gunfight. "Is it over?" "Not yet," said a familiar voice from the doorway. They turned to see a tall man in a federal marshal's uniform entering the jail area, followed by several other officers. It was Attorney Morrison, but he was wearing a badge now, and his entire demeanor had changed. "Marshal Morrison," Judge Harrison said with obvious relief. "Thank God you're here." "Actually, it's Deputy Chief Marshal Morrison," he corrected. "And I've been investigating this slave-trading conspiracy for over a year." Miriam stared at him in confusion. "But you said you were Jake Morrison's uncle." "I am. That's what made me the perfect person to infiltrate this operation. When my nephew got involved with these criminals, I made it my personal mission to bring them all down." The fake Williams looked up from his wounded shoulder. "You set us up. This whole thing was a trap." "From the beginning," Morrison confirmed. "We knew about the slave trading ring, but we needed evidence. When my nephew was arrested, he agreed to cooperate in exchange for a reduced sentence. He fed us information about the operation, including the plan to frame Mr. Stokes." "Then why didn't you stop them sooner?" Miriam demanded. "Why let Virgil suffer?" "Because we needed them to reveal the full extent of the conspiracy. Agent Patterson was killed because he was getting too close to the truth, but we didn't know who the killer was until tonight." "But the torture, the false confession, was never supposed to happen," Morrison said grimly. "Williams went off script. He was supposed to hold Mr. Stokes until trial, not try to extract a confession through violence." Virgil struggled to his feet, using the wall for support. "The other prisoners, the ones you said were listening. Federal agents, all of them. We've been documenting everything Williams and his men said, every detail of their operation. When this goes to trial, we'll have enough evidence to shut down the entire network." "What about the money that was planted at the stage?" "Stop," Miriam asked. "We recovered that too. It was part of the payment Patterson was supposed to receive for keeping quiet about the operation. Williams planted it there to frame you as an accessory." The fake Williams spat blood on the floor. "You think you're so smart, But you have no idea how big this operation really is. We have people in the territorial government, in the federal courts. Morrison corrected. Past tense. We've been rolling up the entire network for the past 6 months. You were the last piece of the puzzle. So it's really over? Miriam asked, hardly daring to believe it. It's over, Judge Harrison confirmed. Mr. Stokes is completely exonerated, and the charges against you are dropped. You're both free to go. Go where? Virgil asked quietly. The stage stop is probably ruined. Even if it's not, who's going to want to stay at a place where all this happened? Miriam looked at him, seeing the defeat in his eyes despite their vindication. He was right, their dream of rebuilding the stage stop together seemed impossible now, tainted by everything that had happened. We'll figure something out, she said, taking his hand. We'll start over somewhere else if we have to. Mrs. Holt, Marshal Morrison said, there's something else you should know. The federal government is prepared to offer you and Mr. Stokes compensation for what you've been through. And we'd like to offer Mr. Stokes a position as a federal consultant, helping us identify other victims of slave trading. What kind of compensation? Miriam asked. Enough to rebuild your stage, stop, and enough to make it the success you originally envisioned. For the first time since this nightmare began, Miriam felt hope stirring in her chest. And the position for Virgil would allow him to travel throughout the territory, helping other people who've been victimized by operations like this one. It would be dangerous work, but important work. Virgil straightened slightly. I'd like that. I'd like to help other people avoid what I went through. Then it's settled, Judge Harrison said. You'll both be compensated for your suffering, and you'll have the chance to build something meaningful from it. As the federal marshals led the fake Williams and his surviving men away, Miriam and Virgil found themselves alone in the jail cell where it had all nearly ended. So, Virgil said quietly, what do we do now? Now we go home, Miriam replied. We go back to the stage, stop, and we finish what we started. Together? Together. He smiled then, the first genuine smile she'd seen from him in weeks. I'd like that very much. So would I. As they walked out of the courthouse together, Miriam felt something she hadn't experienced in a long time. The certainty that the future, whatever it held, would be better than the past. Because they would face it together. 5 years later, Miriam stood in the shade of the apple tree behind the stage stop, watching Virgil demonstrate proper wood-carving techniques to a group of young men who had come to learn the trade. The tree had grown tall and strong, its branches heavy with fruit that would soon be ready for harvest. The stage stop itself had been transformed beyond recognition. What had once been a crumbling adobe building was now a thriving business, with comfortable guest rooms, a dining hall that served Elena's recipes to travelers from across the territory, and a workshop where Virgil created furniture and decorative items that were sought after throughout the region. But more than the physical changes, it was the sense of purpose that filled the place that made Miriam smile. They had created something that mattered, not just a business, but a sanctuary for people who needed hope. Mrs. Stokes, called a voice from the main building. The afternoon stage is coming in. Miriam looked down at the simple gold band on her finger, still marveling at how natural it felt to be called by that name. She and Virgil had married 3 years ago, in a ceremony that had drawn people from all over the territory. Elena had insisted on making the wedding feast. Judge Harrison had performed the ceremony, and even Marshal Morrison had attended, bringing news that the last of the slave-trading network had finally been brought to justice. Coming, she called back, then walked over to where Virgil was working with his students. The stage is here, she told him. He looked up from the piece of wood he was shaping, his face showing the contentment that had gradually replaced the wariness she'd first seen in his eyes. Anyone interesting? We'll find out. They walked together toward the main building, and Miriam marveled at how naturally they moved as a team. 5 years of working side by side had given them an almost telepathic understanding of each other's needs and rhythms. The stage rolled to a stop in front of the building, and the driver climbed down to help his passengers. There were 4 of Thema Merchant and his wife heading to California, a young preacher going to establish a church in a frontier town, and a woman traveling alone who looked to be about Miriam's age. "Welcome to the Stokes stage." "Stop," Miriam said warmly, greeting them as they gathered their luggage. "I'm Miriam Stokes, and this is my husband Virgil." The merchant and his wife were regular customers, and they greeted Virgil and Miriam like old friends. The preacher was young and earnest, full of plans for bringing civilization to the wilderness. But it was the woman traveling alone who caught Miriam's attention. She was well-dressed, but carried herself with the careful dignity of someone who had learned to be self-reliant. There was something in her eyes that Miriam recognized, the look of someone who had faced disappointment and was trying to build something new from the pieces. "I'm Sarah Coleman," the woman said, extending her hand. "I'm traveling to Denver to meet my sister." "Welcome, Mrs. Coleman. Will you be staying the night?" "I'd like to, if you have room." "Of course. Virgil, would you show Mrs. Coleman to the blue room?" "It would be my pleasure." As Virgil led the other guests inside, Miriam lingered with Sarah Coleman. There was something about the woman that reminded her of herself 5 years ago, the same mixture of determination and uncertainty. "Is this your first time in the territory?" Miriam asked. "Yes, I'm well. I'm starting over. My husband passed away last year, and I decided I needed a change of scenery." "I understand. Sometimes a fresh start is exactly what we need." Sarah looked around at the bustling activity of the stage stop. "You've built something wonderful here. It must have taken years." "It did, but it was worth every minute." "Did you build it alone?" Miriam smiled. "Not alone. My husband and I built it together. We were both starting over when we met." "How did you know he was the right person to start over with?" The question was asked with the casual tone of someone making conversation, but Miriam could hear the deeper need behind it. This woman was looking for hope, for proof that it was possible to find happiness after loss. "I didn't know," Miriam said honestly. "Not at first, but I learned that sometimes the best things in life come from taking chances on people who seem impossible." "Impossible?" "The circumstances of how we met, well, let's just say that most people would have thought we were crazy to try to build a life together. But we both believed in second chances, and we were willing to work for what we wanted." Sarah nodded thoughtfully. "Second chances. I like that idea." "There's something else," Miriam continued. "We learned that love isn't just about finding someone who makes you happy. It's about finding someone who makes you brave enough to be the person you're meant to be." "And did you become the person you were meant to be?" Miriam looked around at the stage stop, at the apple tree heavy with fruit, at the workshop where Virgil was teaching young men to create beauty with their hands. She thought about the letters they received from people whose lives had been changed by the network they'd helped build to combat slavery. She thought about the quiet contentment of their daily routine, the way they still caught each other's eyes across a crowded room and smiled. "I think we both did," she said. "It just took us a while to find each other." That evening, as the guests settled in for the night, Miriam and Virgil sat under the apple tree, watching the sun set over the mountains. It had become their daily ritual time to reflect on the day's events and plan for tomorrow. "Sarah Coleman reminds me of someone," Virgil said, reaching for Miriam's hand. "Who?" "A woman I met at a livestock auction 5 years ago. She was brave enough to see possibilities where everyone else saw problems." Miriam squeezed his hand. That woman was a fool. She had no idea what she was getting into. No, she didn't, but she did it anyway, and that made all the difference. For both of us. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars appear one by one in the darkening sky. Somewhere in the distance, a night bird called to its mate, and the sound seemed to carry all the hopes and dreams of people who had found each other against impossible odds. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if we'd never met?" Miriam asked. "No," Virgil said without hesitation. "I don't believe in wondering about roads not taken. I believe in being grateful for the road we're on, even with everything we went through. Especially because of everything we went through, the hard times made us appreciate what we have now." Miriam leaned against his shoulder, feeling the solid warmth of him, the steady rhythm of his breathing. "I love you, Virgil Stokes." "I love you too, Miriam Stokes, more than I ever thought it was possible to love someone." Above them, The apple tree rustled in the evening breeze, its branches heavy with the promise of tomorrow's harvest. And beneath it, two people who had found each other in the most unlikely circumstances continued to build a life that proved love could bloom at any age, under any conditions, when hearts were willing to take the chance.